Welcome everyone to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most absolute, incredible underdog comeback stories in modern tech history. We're going to map out the exact roadmap of a company that was, quite frankly, on the brink of irrelevance, only to completely claw its way back and fundamentally reshape the entire computing landscape. I am talking, of course, about AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, and their Zen resurrection and push for AI dominance from 2017 to the present.
So it all starts with a seemingly impossible question. How do you beat a monopoly? For a really long time, the computer processor market was, let's be honest, pretty much a one-horse race. Competitors were just struggling to even keep pace with massive entrenched giants. But the journey we're about to explore, it's a strategic masterclass in dismantling a monopoly piece by piece. It's a story of pivoting when it literally means survival, making some massive bets on engineering, and just perfectly timing a huge market shift.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the architect of the comeback.
Every great turnaround needs an architect. Back in 2014, AMD was facing some very, very dark days. The stakes were life or death for the company, but a pivotal leadership change altered their trajectory forever. Enter Dr. Lisa Su, who took over as CEO that year. She immediately, and I mean entirely, restructured the company. But her most crucial move? She looked at the budget and made a definitive, hard choice. Prioritize engineering over marketing. Because in a hyper-competitive tech landscape, you can't just slap flashy ads on a mediocre product and expect to win. You absolutely need the hardware to back it up. So she bet the farm on a clean sheet architecture. They literally threw out the old blueprints and designed a completely new processor from scratch. That engineering-first focus, that was the absolute bedrock of their resurrection.
Moving right along to Section 2, striking back with Zen.
So that massive bet on engineering, it took a few years to cook, but when it was finally ready to be served in 2017, the tech industry was caught completely off guard. They called the new architecture Zen, and the consumer product launched as Ryzen. Now picture this. For years, you and I were used to paying top dollar for Intel's 4-core chips, while Intel was basically just resting on its laurels. Then, out of nowhere, AMD drops Ryzen, and to massive critical acclaim, they offered 8 cores and 16 threads for the exact same price point as the competitor's 4 cores. It's like suddenly getting an 8-lane highway for the price of a 4-lane road. They effectively doubled the computing capacity for average consumers overnight. The shock to the system was huge. AMD was officially back in the game.
But here's the thing. AMD didn't just target the PCs sitting on our desks. They went straight after the massive data centers powering the entire internet. That same year, in 2017, they launched EPYC, codenamed Naples, to re-enter the highly lucrative server market. And they brought massive core counts to the table, up to 64 massive cores. This allowed data centers to process vastly more web traffic in a much smaller physical footprint. And at the time, Intel simply could not match that kind of density. AMD was suddenly offering superior data center solutions, hitting the monopoly right where it hurt the absolute most.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is, well, let's look at Section 3, the chiplet and TSMC advantage. Because the hidden secret sauce behind this explosive comeback requires a fundamental rethinking of how a computer chip is actually built. I mean, you don't just magically double your competitor's core counts, right? And that brings us to the chiplet design. Instead of trying to manufacture one giant, incredibly complex monolithic chip where, just one microscopic flaw ruins the whole expensive thing, AMD decided to use smaller, much easier to manufacture chiplets. They then stitched these smaller dies together using a proprietary high-speed connection they called Infinity Fabric. By adopting this highly efficient design years before their competitors even caught on, AMD cleverly bypassed a massive manufacturing bottleneck. It was brilliant. And this chiplet strategy opened the door for an incredibly agile manufacturing partnership. Because the chips were smaller and easier to produce, AMD could aggressively utilize TSMC, that's the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, and their vastly superior 7nm and 5nm nodes. Just to put that into perspective for you, a smaller nanometer node means the microscopic transistors are smaller, they're faster, and they're way more power efficient. Contrast that with what was happening across the street. Intel was struggling heavily with extensive 10nm delays. This gave AMD a compounding manufacturing edge. They had a smarter design built on much better, faster manufacturing technology.
All right, we need to pick up the pace here because things start moving fast. Section 4, taking the market crown. Let's move on and see how this builds. Because with a superior architecture and a dominant manufacturing partner, AMD shifted gears from just being a scrappy competitor to actively taking the market crown. Look at how aggressive this multi-year roadmap is. In 2017, they launched Zen 1 and EPYC, securing their foothold. By 2020, they pushed the architecture even further to take the definitive performance crown with Zen 3. In 2022, they flexed their newly found financial muscle with a massive acquisition of Xilinx. And by 2023, they launched the MI300X to tackle the AI era. It is just compounding momentum perfectly executed.
Let's actually zoom in on that 2020 to 2023 market takeover for a second. With the release of Zen 3 in the Ryzen 5000 series and later Zen 4 in the 7000 series, AMD wasn't just competing on price anymore. No, they were consistently beating Intel in performance per watt, which means they delivered more raw power while using far less electricity, and they were absolutely winning in sheer gaming performance. Over in the server space, EPYC processors, codenamed Milan and Genoa, started taking massive chunks of server market share away from Intel's Xeon lineup. And this is absolutely crucial for all of us, because this fierce competition, that is exactly what drives down the prices of the PCs we buy and the cloud services we rely on every single day.
Then, in 2022, they make a move that shows just how colossal their ambitions had really become. Roughly $50 billion. I just want to let that staggering figure sink in for a moment. That is how much AMD paid to acquire the FPGA giant Xilinx. If you're not familiar, FPGAs are basically flexible microchips that can be reprogrammed entirely, even after they've been manufactured. By absorbing Xilinx, AMD instantly cemented a massive footprint in adaptive computing and embedded systems. They were no longer just a standard computer processor company anymore. They were fundamentally broadening their arsenal for the future.
Which brings us to our final act. Section 5, the AI boss fight.
So here we are in the present day, facing the ultimate challenge for every tech company right now. The landscape has shifted completely once again. It's no longer just about standard processors. It is entirely about the fight for data center supremacy. Riding this massive wave of generative AI, the technology powering the chatbots, the image generators, and all those predictive tools you are probably using every single day, AMD launched the MI300X AI accelerator. Right now, NVIDIA has effectively become the final boss of the tech world, holding undisputed dominance in AI hardware. So what is AMD doing? They're taking the exact same aggressive, high-value playbook they used to disrupt the CPU market, and they're applying it directly to the AI space.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where AMD stands today. They have evolved into a highly diversified powerhouse fighting a really complex three-front war. Look at this. On the CPU front, they are battling Intel with Ryzen and EPYC. In the explosive GPU and AI space, they are taking on NVIDIA directly with the MI300X. And in the specialized FPGA market, they now hold the unmatched Xilinx arsenal. They have literally surrounded the computing ecosystem.
So we started this explainer by asking how you beat a monopoly. And we just watched AMD execute a flawless, decade-long strategy to do exactly that in the CPU market. But now they are staring down a brand new giant in the AI era. With their engineering-first focus, their total chiplet mastery, and their relentless compounding momentum, it leaves us with one incredibly fascinating question to ponder. Can AMD actually topple NVIDIA next? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.